Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Well, I'm an alcoholic. And is my tie okay? I'd like to apologize up front for my language and my opinions. You hear some people in Alcoholics Anonymous say that the longer they're sober, the less they know. The reverse is true for me. I know a lot of shit, and I'm going to bore you with it this evening, so I'd like to just apologize for the opinions up front. For the new people, the only true authority that we have in AA is the big book and me. And what happened to me, and I'd like to say happy birthday to Bob, class of '85. We're tough. There's a bunch of us. How many people in here this evening got sober in 1985? All right. I turned 7 in March, so that means I'm almost 8, and feel really good about that. I try to take credit for it, but it's too painful, so I give that up. What happened to me, a funny thing happened to me when I was 6 years old. My dad got sober, and he's still sober. I guess he's coming up on 39, and he got sober. He got struck sober. And so what happened to me is I grew up in AA. He still goes to meetings. We go to the Hermosa Beach Men's Stag every Monday night. It's the Gordon and Bill show. And he got real active, and so did my mother. My mother helped set up the Al-Anon Central Office in LA. And you know, back in those days, there weren't near as many meetings as there are like now. So what they did most of the time is they went around and started meetings. And they took me with them. You know, I can remember every Friday night for God knows how many years we were in a meeting in Westchester in the basement of a church, and I would sit in the kitchen, and there was a woman there that they actually hired. Her name was Emily, and she would during the break bring out the coffee and the donuts, and I'd go with her and help them deliver the donuts and stuff and play around in the kitchen. And I have hundreds and hundreds of memories of standing in a circle after these meetings holding hands going, you know, keep coming back, it works, you know. And, you know, I heard my dad's story, God knows how many times, and all of his buddies, and the hospitals hadn't figured out how to make money out of us yet, so when he'd go get him, he'd bring him home. You know, you really couldn't take him anywhere, and he'd bring these guys home. And, you know, many times we'd be sitting in the living room watching TV, and then I'd have to leave, and they'd bring some old fat Italian dude in there, you know, and him and some other guy'd sit there and beat on the book and point their finger at him, you know, and I'd have to go sit in the other room. And I'd come home from school, and there'd be guys laying on the back porch waiting for whom I now know was their sponsor to come home, and some of them were sober, and a lot of them were drunk. And I'd get them up. There was one old boy named Harold Terrell. You know, he became like a member of the family, and he finally burned himself up in his bed. He never could get sober. He'd get sober for a year or two and then get loaded. And I came home one day, and he was on the back porch drunk, and I got pissed off at him and started hollering at him. You know, I told him, you're not supposed to do that, man. The idea is not to drink, you know, and I'd bring him in the house and made him take a shower and made him shave before my dad got home, so my dad wouldn't be shocked to see him in such a disheveled appearance, you know. And now I know why we were always in Bakersfield. It was the Southern California Convention. You know, I couldn't figure, why the hell are we in Bakersfield again, you know? The place is a hellhole. And, you know, so I've been to all the conventions, you know, and all the roundups and the parties and and all that stuff. So I knew that all of you weren't a bunch of old people in overcoats hanging on to each other, not drinking. You know, I'd heard all the laughter and stuff. I don't recommend raising your kids in AA. It was boring, you know. I mean, especially when you want to get loaded, you know, when you want to party. My parents are two of the most boring people I've ever met in my life. You know, I mean, my dad used to be a race car driver. He was Grand National Champion a couple of different years, and he had a, but when I knew him, he was just straight and boring. You know, nothing ever really happened in our house. You know, I didn't grow up in an environment where every time I walked by my father, I'd have to duck. I didn't know if he was going to hit me or hug me. You hear that story a lot in AA. Nobody beat me up. You know, nobody molested me. I'm not a victim of incest. You know, the worst thing that happened to me is I got ignored. You know, I was an only child, you know. Like somebody told me one time, you know, emotional abuse is just as bad as physical abuse. You know, as far as I'm concerned, that's bullshit. You know, I'd much rather be ignored than beat the shit out, have the shit beat out of me. You know? But that's kind of what happened. My dad was starting a business, and they were both real involved in AA and stuff, you know, and I just got kind of left alone. Well, when it was my turn to drink, armed with everything I knew about Alcoholics Anonymous, I did it with vigor. You know, I can remember waiting, wondering when I was going to get to drink. You know, I'd see it around me, and I couldn't wait. You know, I mean, it looked like fun before I even did it. I'd see other kids, you know, sipping beers or something like that, you know, and I think, I want to do that. So when I was like about 14, I think, I was at a friend's house, and we got real drunk, like one of these 16-ounce glass things, and filled it up with whatever we could find and just choked down a couple of glasses, you know, just got plowed. And his older brother was having a party, and we disrupted the party, and his older brother threw me in the car and drove me home and dumped me out on the front lawn. And I crawled in the house, I don't know what time it was, and I crawled down the hall and got into my bedroom, and I had an old record player with a lid on it, an old Webcore record player. And I remember laying in bed with one foot out on the floor trying to stop the spinning, you know, and I was going to puke, I was going to get sick, and I didn't want to get caught. So I puked in the record player and closed the lid, you know, and stuck my head out the window and knocked the screen off the window and puked down the side of the house. And my dad went outside to find out who was trying to break in, you know, and look, and he saw this, and I went, geez. So I crawled down the hall, and I'm sitting on the toilet with a trash can between my legs because it was coming out all orifices, you know. And I remember my mother opening the bathroom door and looking at me, and I remember looking up and seeing this aghast expression on her face, and my father was standing behind her laughing hysterically, you know. And both of them in their own way were saying, oh my God, it's another one. You know, we're continuing the line. My father's side of the family is just decimated with alcoholism. It's really incredible. You know, we come from a long line of good, hearty alcoholics. And off I went. You know, off I went. And there was no hesitation. You know, I did it with a vengeance. I never, like our leader, I never drank for the taste of it. I drank for effect, always. I didn't know any other way to do that. You know, I never sat down and, oh, it's going to be nice to have a couple of beers. It was always, I'm going to sit down and get shit-faced. You know, let's do it. Let's not play around. Let's do it. Let's go out and do it. There used to be an old guy that lived behind a gas station in an old wrecked car, and you could go there and give him $5, and he'd go down and get you a six-pack of 16-ounce, and he'd keep the change, and we'd go out and drink, you know, 3 or 4 just as fast as we could, you know, and just get plowed and get sick and laugh and everything. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. I'm a child of the 60s. I graduated from high school in 65. It was a great, great decade. You know, it was a great time to be getting drunk and getting loaded. It was really great. The road from Los Angeles to San Francisco was the road to nirvana. You know, I mean, it was summertime all the time. They weren't eating hitchhikers yet, so it was safe to get around. You know, the drugs were pure. You know, I mean, I can remember being up in San Francisco, and you'd sleep in the street in a parking space, and they found out that as long as there was money in the meter, it was your property. You know, so people would walk around and put money in the meters. We just lived in the street. You know, I mean, Golden Gate Park was the center of the universe. You know, it was all happening. We weren't getting drunk and loaded. We were making a political statement. We were changing the world. You know, and it changed. You know, if you hadn't noticed. And I think the 90s are going to make the 60s look like a, you know, elementary school. But it was a good time. I'll never forget 1966 and 67. Those were two of the most fun times that I can ever remember having in my life. One 4th of July, I think, in 1966, I was in Bass Lake. And it was the 4th of July, and the Hells Angels come into Bass Lake, and I had never been there. And I remember sitting under some trees on a hillside, and they came roaring into the valley, and my life changed. You know, I want to be that. That's what I want to be. I want to be an outlaw biker. I want to be a gangster. I want to look like that. I want to be like that, you know. I want those kinds of women. You know, I want tattoos, and I went about, this was graduate school, man, you know, I went about it. This is what I want to be. So I met some young lady, and we went up to Oregon, back to the earth, to grow our own. And I joined a bike club up there, and I started getting tattoos, and I had a chrome Nazi helmet, you know, and a primary chain for a belt, and big old boots and chains around them and stuff. You know, I had a clip-on earring because I didn't want to hurt myself. You know. And I carried a little .22 pistol, nickel-plated pistol in my back pocket, you know. And so I looked like it. I looked good, you know. Guys would say, "You look good, man." I said, "Thank you." You know? And see, my story is I was a surfer and a tough guy and a biker, and I couldn't surf very well. You know, my motorcycle rarely ran, and I was afraid to fight. You know, but I looked good. I looked okay, you know. And by the time I was 22 years old, I ended up in the Oregon State Mental Institution. And the party stopped somewhere. Something happened. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I got married to this young lady, and we had a couple of kids right away, and I got a job, and I started running with these people, and I was drinking and smoking dope and taking acid, and I was shooting speed mostly, almost every day. And I ended up in the Oregon State Mental Institution because I needed a rest. It's rough out there. And I got exhausted. And I was 22. And I look back on that now. If you'd have asked me what was going on then, I would have told you that, well, I'm just a sensitive kid in kind of a rough world. You know, I'm an emotional, artistic type. And it's just too rough out there for me, and I need understanding. See, I went to my first shrink when I was 13 years old, and I have emotional problems. You need to listen to me a lot so that you and I together can help me. So I went to the mental institution, and I got out, and then I went back in again for a follow-up program. And I lost a wife and 2 kids. I lost a home. I lost a couple of jobs. Lost a couple of cars. You know, and I was basically living on the street. And the state of Oregon decided that it was time for me to leave, and I agreed, and I left. And I came back down to Los Angeles where it's safe. And I became normal. And what normal is for an alcoholic of my variety is I found a woman, because you can never, ever be alone, ever. I can't be alone. I need somebody to take care of me. And I suggest to all of you, this is an opinion, is don't ever marry an alcoholic. Find an Al-Anon. And there's a good reason for this. I'm serious about this. You know, there's a good reason for this. When an Al-Anon has a slip, they think about you. Then there's 2 people thinking about you, which is always better. You know? So I was lucky. I found one, and we set up housekeeping. My father had a small machine shop in El Segundo, and he gave me a job because I was basically unemployable. And I got a job. And I quit doing all the overt drugs. You know, I quit shooting dope and heroin and all that stuff, and quit taking acid and reds and whites, because when you do that, you can't make it to work. You know, I mean, it's just over the edge. Everybody knows that you shouldn't do that. So I quit that, and except for the whites. You got to get up in the morning. What I did is I became normal, and what normal is I drank on the weekends. That's what regular people do. And during the week, I just smoked dope, because smoking dope isn't getting loaded. It's what you do in between getting loaded. It's just maintenance. So, you know, that would kind of get me through the week, and then I would party on the weekends and drink. And I did that for 15 more years. And by the time I was 37, I weighed over 300 pounds. My liver stuck out on one side. I got into a political discussion with some people in a bar, and my real mistake was the bar was on the second floor, and they threw me out. But I was right, you know? So I shattered my ankle, and I walked with a very pronounced limp. I had a pinched nerve in my arm, so my right arm was kind of curled up against my side, and I was a big ball of sweat. And I was remarried. I had 2 more children. I had another house. My father had retired, and the machine shop got bigger, and we had some good times. I was making more money than I'd ever made in my life. I was driving a brand new Cadillac, you know, and I wear long sleeve shirts so you couldn't see my tattoos, because I was normal now. And I didn't carry the gun anymore, except sometimes. And and I hit bottom in that Cadillac. That was my bottom. It wasn't the nut house when I was 22. It was when I was 37 and I was fat and sweaty. And what I started doing when I was a kid is I started drinking. And I ended up at 37 with a gin bottle between my legs. That was my drug of choice, Tanqueray gin. That was it. When I discovered that, did you ever freeze it in the freezer so it would get real thick and creamy? You know, I used to love to pour it out, you know. That was my drug. Alcohol. I'm a garden variety drunk that grew up in the 60s. You know, a lot of alcoholics have an affinity for LSD. It gives a paisley tint to the drunk. It makes it more interesting. You know, I have a very close feeling for linoleum floors, you know? And the stucco ceilings and stuff, you know, it just, you know, I can still see it, kind of, you know, and I'd be humped over the toilet, you know, puking. It gives you something to look at, you know? It's kind of interesting. But that's all it was. All that stuff was a sideline to me, you know. Drinking is what I did. It always fixed me. Even up to the end, it always got rid of the physical pain. It quit getting rid of the emotional pain, but I was physically very sick, and I've got a lot of residual crap from that. And when I would drink, I remember, you know, it says in the doctor's opinion, that sense of ease and comfort that comes from having a couple of drinks that we see others taking with impunity. And I can remember to this day sitting down at the end of the day and drinking that first drink and just, you know, and then the second one, you know, and everything would just smooth out, you know, and life got a little good for a while, you know, 5 or 10 minutes, you know, and then somewhere around the 47th drink, you know, you just kind of drift off into oblivion. But in the end, there was no more emotional relief. All it got rid of was the physical pain. So I had, on March the 27th, 1985, I had one of the 2 things that we all share. I had a moment of clarity. For years, people were telling me, Bill, you drink too much, you get loaded too much. You know, why don't you back off, man? Just have a tonic this time. Don't have a drink. Back off, man. Slow down. Slow down a little bit. You're killing yourself, you know. And I had alienated everybody from me with my big mouth. You know, I still do that sometimes. But I have hundreds of memories of somebody standing in front of me. I can see a face in front of me somewhere. And I'm talking to this person, and they're listening to me. And then I can see the face change to that look of disgust as I say something wonderful, you know, and very profound, I'm sure, and politically correct. You know, and their face changes, and they just drop their head and shake their head and walk away, hundreds of times. So there was nobody left in my life. And I had this moment of clarity. I had a guy in the car, and I started telling him, I can't live like this anymore, man. I just can't live like this anymore. And I went home that night. I remember my last drink was a glass of wine. And I called my mother. This is a woman that had been in Al-Anon for 30-some years. My parents never preached to me about AA, ever, not once that I can ever remember. And she came and got me, and she took me to a hospital, and they checked me in, and I spent 30 days in a hospital. She took me to one place, I think it was Comp Care. And the woman was sitting across the desk, and she says, it'll be $25,000. And I remember looking at her going, I'm not that drunk. So we went to another place. My big book cost me $8,000. I figured that wasn't bad in '85. And I spent 30 days in this place. While I was in there, they'd let you out once in a while. I never left the place. I was afraid to go outside. I knew that if I went out on the street, I was going to get drunk. I knew it. I was convinced. There was no way that I was going to be able to live life and just go to those lame-ass meetings and not drink. It would never work for me. It wouldn't work for me. The last place I wanted to be was in my old man's club. That was the last place. It was humiliating. Alcoholics Anonymous is not hip. It's not hip. Recovery is hip. You know, everybody's into it now. AA isn't hip. When you come to Alcoholics Anonymous and you end up in a place with linoleum floors and metal folding chairs, that is not hip, you know, at all. So I didn't want to be here, and I got out of that place and I went to my first meeting I went to was the Gong Show at the Hermosa Beach Alano Club. I've been sober 7.5 years, and my first meeting was the Gong Show, and it says something about God working in my life. I went there, everybody looked like they were 12 years old. You know, I remember feeling like I was about 100. I was big, fat, bald, and slow, you know, and I didn't want to be there. It was embarrassing, and people would stand up there and go, well, I'm so happy for my chip, you know, and God's just so wonderful today. I remember saying I just wanted to puke on my shoes, you know. It's just, God, I've been reduced to this. I've been reduced to Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's what happened to me. I got reduced. You know, I'd been to all the shrinks. I'd been to the mental institutions. I'd been in jail. You know, people have talked to me. I'd spent 2.5 years in group therapy. I'd been Rolfed, primal screamed, transactional analysis. You know, I'm okay, you're so. The parent, the adult, and the child, and all that stuff. And I believed it all. I know more about myself than is safe to know. You know, most of it is irrelevant information. You know, and nothing ever changed in my life that I'm conscious of. You know, I mean, the information was there. So after a couple of weeks, I saw this guy roaming around, and the hospitals are good because they teach you all the buzzwords and what to say, and you can walk right in and talk correctly right away. You know, and I got in, and I'm talking correctly and putting on the Bill C. persona. You know, you can pretend to be a biker, you can pretend to be a tough guy, you can pretend to be a member of AA too. You know, a lot of people do it. And I was in there doing it. And after a couple of weeks, I figured, well, I better do this sponsor thing, because when people ask you if you got a sponsor, you can't say no, you know, because you're not cool. So I walked up to this guy and I asked him, I said, will you be my sponsor? And he's a short guy and he's got a full head of hair, which pisses me off. And he looked at me and he said, I'll meet you at the Hermosa Beach Alano Club at 8 o'clock on Monday night and we'll talk about it. This was the first indication that maybe I had asked the wrong person, you know, because I thought they were just supposed to say, oh, yes, I'd love to, you know, come to my house with me. And it wasn't like that. I thought, oh, shit, there's going to be a test. So I showed up there, and he took me around the corner of the Alano Club, and he asked me 2 questions. The first one is the standard question. He said, are you willing to go to any lengths for victory over alcohol? Another lame-ass, mindless platitude from Alcoholics Anonymous. And I looked at him and I said, well, of course. And I suggest if nobody's asked you that question that you just say yes, because number 1, you don't know what they mean by that. And number 2, if you say no, you have to listen to them for another 10 minutes or so. So I said I was in the hospital, they told me, and I said yes, oh, definitely, I was, you know. And then the second thing he asked me was more powerful to me, and I know this upset some people, but it had a great effect on me. He looked at me and he says, I notice that when you identify yourself in meetings that you call yourself an alcoholic and an addict. And I said, well, yeah, I've done a lot of drugs, and you know, what's wrong with that? Well, I mean, what's the big deal? And he says, well, I might suggest to you if you're calling yourself an addict because you think it's a little hipper and a little slicker and a little cooler, you might want to just drop it and be like everybody else in your life. This is Alcoholics Anonymous. And I remember standing there looking at him, and the anger welled up from my stomach and came up into my chest and my neck, and veins popped out in my neck, and what was going on in my head is, who the fuck do you think you are? And what came out of my mouth was, okay. When you're almost 40 years old and you weigh 300 pounds and you're bald and you're in your old man's club, there's not much to argue about anymore, I mean, there was no more fight left in me. I was not sitting around discussing things with people and arguing. I wasn't hanging out with people in AA then. I wasn't having any fun at all. I was scared. I was really scared. I was frightened. I remember leaving work one day and going to a noon meeting and just standing up at the podium telling everybody in the room that I was scared. And I didn't feel like I belonged at home, and my wife didn't want me there anyway. About a year before I got sober, I was seeing another shrink, and we had a discussion of honesty, so I went home after drinking a half a gallon of wine and told my wife about the hookers I'd been using for years. I figured she'd understand. Then we can both work on my problem together, and that destroyed whatever was left in the relationship. So, I mean, there was nothing going on for me at home, and I sure as hell didn't belong in Alcoholics Anonymous. This is my old man's club. So I was frightened. I was alone. I was stuck. So I couldn't argue with this guy anymore. So he told me, he says, come over to my house on Thursday at 5 o'clock, read the doctor's opinion, make notes in the margin about what you agree with and what you don't agree with, and we'll discuss it. So I went home and I did my homework and I made my notes in the margin, and I went to his house Thursday at 5 o'clock and we sat down. He didn't trust me that I had read it, so he made me read it to him out loud. And that, I don't know about you, that was humiliating to me. It was sitting there in this guy's living room, this stranger's living room, reading this book to this guy, this lame-ass thing that was written in the 30s. It was stupid. I mean, I felt like, God, this is so dumb. This is not cool. This is not cool. People aren't listening to me. They're talking to me. They're not listening to me. So I read the thing to him, and in the doctor's opinion, it describes 4 or 5 different kinds of alcoholics. And he asked me when we got to that part, he goes, which one are you? And I picked one, and I said, well, I think I'm like this one. He goes, well, circle it, put a star next to it. You're in the book. They're talking about you. You're in the book. So I read on a couple more pages, and it says the only thing that's going to save an alcoholic of your variety, because you're one of these guys, you're in the book, is a complete psychic change. And we determined that I needed a complete psychic change. That the way I perceive the world around me should never, ever be confused with reality. I don't see things right. My relationships are all screwed up. I remember arguing with him one time, and he looked at me and he stopped me in mid-sentence and he goes, what could you possibly tell me about living life? Look at yours. I went, God damn. I mean, what do you say to that, And you can't hit him. Well, you could, I guess, but. So we read on. In there it says the only thing that's going to bring about this psychic change is contact with a higher power, whatever it is that has saved your life. Well, I had a problem with that. So we read on. We read Bill's story, and I related to Bill dragging the mattress down from the 2nd floor for fear that he might jump out. It's just like an alcoholic to jump out of a 2nd floor window, probably onto a grassy lawn, where he would paralyze himself for the rest of his life and really be pitiful, And I could just relate to that, busting through the window sash and all. And we read that, and we were talking. It says, if anybody asks you, you're on the first step. You're powerless over alcohol. Your life is unmanageable. You're on the first step. And we read through the book. Each week we would read a chapter. I'd make notes and we'd discuss it, and we'd have these long-winded arguments, or I would do the arguing. At one point he looked at me. I was arguing with him about God. And he said, hey, look, you either have faith or you don't. There's no argument. Don't argue about it anymore. It's irrelevant. Another thing he told me, and this was always one-on-one in the privacy of his own room, he never humiliated me in front of people. Well, he does now that he knows I can take it. But back then, he never contrived. I've seen people do this to people in front of other people, and I think it's absolutely uncalled for. I think we've had enough of that shit on the street. We don't need it in here. It was always one-on-one. He was not impressed by me, and he was not intimidated by me. Not in the least. He looked at me one time, he put his hand on my chest, and he looked me right in the eye, and he said, Bill, your opinion is absolutely irrelevant. He says, your emotions are as fucked up as your thinking. Keep them to yourself, please. Oh my God. You know? I mean, I grew up in therapy. Everybody was always really interested in how I was feeling. Really interested, you know. Get with that. Be there. Stay there. Work it out. Work it out, you know. Put your dad in front of you. Tell your father what it is you'd really like to say to him. Go ahead, you know. You know. Stay there. Be there. You know. That's good, you know. For years I do this. Alcoholics Anonymous is not therapy. These people really don't give a shit. You know, they say they do, but they're in it for themselves. You know? He was awful to me. It hurt. You know, it really did. So the first step was easy because I knew I was powerless. I knew my life was unmanageable. The simple fact that there was nobody in my life was a clear example. The whole idea was to have a party years ago, and where the hell had the party gone? And I was all alone and everybody hated me. It wasn't a matter of not having any money or not having a car being unmanageable. You know, my life clearly was unmanageable. I had no problem with the first step at all. The second step says that we come to believe in a power greater than ourselves is going to restore us to sanity. As far as I was concerned, if you believed in a power greater than yourself, you were insane, so I just skipped it. The third step says that we made a decision to turn our life and our will over to the weird concept in the second step. It was stupid. I just skipped it, you know. Just say the dumb prayer and get on with it. Let's do the fourth step. That's what everybody's sniveling about. Let's get the show on the road. You know, so I sniveled about it for about 6 weeks, and I did my inventory. And all the time we're reading the book, and he's taking me to meetings. You know, what my sponsor did for me is he did AA with me. He didn't tell me about it. He did it with me. I suggest to you that if you have a sponsor that is not taking you through this process of the 12 steps, that you don't have a sponsor. If you want to get a sponsor, walk up to somebody and look them right in the eye and ask them, have you worked the steps? If they say yes, then say, would you please help me do that? That's what I believe a sponsor is for. What my sponsor told me, he says, we can sit around and talk about what you think your problems are, but I don't think that's my job. If you want to do that, we can spend some time doing that, but I don't think that's my job. My job is to work you through the steps the way I was worked through the steps. And that's what I do today, and that's what he did for me. God bless him. He took me to Alcoholics Anonymous. He showed me what it was all about. He took me everywhere he went. I followed that man around like a dog for 2 years. He told me, Bill, the reason you were sent to Alcoholics Anonymous is that we need better transportation. You know, and I had the Cadillac. You know, so I drove the AA assault vehicle. You know, I still do. I still do that. I still do it. You know, I still do it. We went and got him. We do 12-step calls together. He says, you don't talk to him on the phone, you go get him. You know, so you can look the demon right in the eye and see it. You know, because it's alive, you know, it exists, it's real, the demon. And when you're there with them, especially in the living room, when they can't ingest any more fluid anymore, their body is rejecting any fluid, and you see that wild-eyed fear in their eyes, you get real goddamn grateful. You know, and we've done that a lot. And he took me. He called me up in the middle of the night and he said, Bill, God called me tonight. You know? He's drunk over in Gardena. You know? Come and get me. You know? And he talked just like that, just fucking loony. You know, it's real. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. You know, absolutely wonderful. You know, everybody. I always thought it was going to be boring here. You know, this is great. So I did my inventory, and I did my fifth step with him. I showed up over there, and we read the part, you know, in the chapter about the fifth step. And I remember showing up over at his house. It was like August or something like that, and he lives right on the beach. And he was sitting out on the beach. It was the middle of the day. I figured this should be done in a dark room somewhere, right? I mean, it was a pretty good story, I thought, you know. And he's, come on out here, and I'm sitting on the beach. There's thousands of people around. And I took this leap of faith. The fifth step is a leap of faith. What I believe about the third step is, the third step is a decision. There's nothing really to do. The third step is when we decide that we're going to do AA. I'm going to do it. You don't have to believe in God. I hear people, I'm stuck on the third step. Where? Where? A guy reached across, I was with this guy in my office one time, and I said, we read the part about the third step, and I said, are you ready to do this now? And he said, no. I said, why not? He says, well, I don't believe in God. And I said, well, neither do I, so what? You know, and he says, well, I'm not ready. I go, oh, yes, you are. Take my hand, we're going to do this. He goes, no, I don't want to do it. And I says, well, then get the fuck out if you're not ready. You know, I'm ready. I'm willing to do it. Let's do it. So we got on our knees and we did it. All it is a decision. Are you going to do this program or what? Are you going to do it? Let's do it. If you're not going to do it, don't waste my time. Let's get the show on the road. You're either here or you're not. The fourth step is a list of the life and will that it talks about in the third step. The third step says we're going to turn our life and our will over. Well, what do we know? What life and will? What do you mean life and will? What do you mean by that? The inventory, the fourth step, is the life and the will. It's a list of resentments, a list of fears, and a list of sexual transgression. The sheep stories, or goat stories, depending upon. I mean, everybody has one. You know, it may not have looked like a sheep, but it's a sheep, you know. I mean, it's all that stuff, you know. You can't drink and get loaded for a lot of years without ending up in some pretty weird places. At least you think they're weird. I thought mine were pretty weird. Then my sponsor shared with me, and I was shocked. You know, I was shocked. You know, I'm still shocked. You know, it's pretty stunning. So we make a list of this life and will that got us to Alcoholics Anonymous. The fifth step is where we literally turn it over and give it away and give it to somebody else. So if you want to do a third step, do your inventory. To me, that's what the third step really is. And that fifth step is that leap of faith where I'm going to walk up to this guy who's not charging me any money, whom I barely know. I've only known him for 4 or 5, 6 months, something like that. And I'm going to tell him all my innermost secrets. It's pretty bizarre that we do that. Pretty bizarre. And it really surprised me initially that not a whole lot of people really do that. Not a whole lot of people really do it. You know, some do. After I did my fifth step with him, he went around and started telling everybody, hey, he's in now. He's in. He's okay. You can talk to him. I said, what do you mean? I thought the only requirement for membership was a desire to stop drinking. And he informed me that, well, that may be the only requirement, but if you want to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, there's a few things that you have to do. And you've done it. You're in. What AA has become to me in my life today is the motorcycle gang that I was never really part of. It's the football team that I couldn't qualify for. You know, it's the in crowd that I was never in. You know, and there is an in crowd in AA. There are cliques in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's true. You know, the clique in AA, there's two kinds of people. There's those who work the steps and those who don't. And those who work the steps are the clique. And if you want to get in the clique, work the steps. You know, you see people stand around, all we are doing, the people that have worked the steps in AA, is hanging on to each other. And if you walk up and say, hey, can I come in? Well, sure. Sure. The door's never closed if anybody wants to come and do it. You know, so there are cliques. The sixth and seventh step talk about character defects. It's 2 paragraphs in the book. You say the dumb prayer, it's over. There's nothing to do. You'll probably review them for the rest of your life. You know, but we're not going to sit our character defects up on a wall and pick them off one at a time. You know, it's like, to me, my impression was, well, now that I'm up to the 6th and 7th step and I'm in the in crowd, I'm empowered again. Now I'm going to adjust myself and fix myself. That has not proven to be true for me. What has happened for me is when my character defects get painful enough, God seems to show them to me. And say, here's what you look like, asshole. You know, now keep doing it. Now try. And it gets jerked away from me. While I was doing my 5th step, he was taking notes. And I thought, well, maybe he's going to turn this over to Life magazine or something, you know. I made my list of amends to make, my 8th step. I went to him with my list, and he brought a few things to my attention, like policemen. I would have never suspected that you would consider making an amends to a cop. I mean, part of their job is taking abuse, you know? And he brought this to my attention. The other thing was dope dealers. Well, dope dealers are bad people anyway. You know, if you didn't pay them the money, so what? You know, there's people in AA that will tell you that you don't have to pay back the IRS, that you don't have to pay back the dope dealers. I fell in with a group that was a little bit to the right of Noriega. This is right-wing death squad AA. These guys are very rigid in the way they believe things. You know, it's like when you make your amends, you go look them right in the eye. You pay back all the money, all of it. You know, and if you're not sure about how much, pay a little extra, just to be damn sure. And it doesn't matter who it is. Okay? So we made my list. And he says, now you go about the business of making the amends. Well, the fourth step is important enough to do poorly. I mean, to get the pressure off. You got to come in, we're only as sick as our secrets. And if you can do your inventory, you can always do another one. It's fearless and thorough, as fearless and thorough as you can be. You can always do another inventory. The amends are important enough to do right the first time. So he told me, he says, take your time. As we come to each one of these things, we'll talk about it. If I don't have the personal experience of something of this nature, we'll find somebody who has had, and we'll work through this. I went on a men's retreat up at Manresa one time before I went back up to Oregon to make amends to my kids and my ex-wife. And I was very fortunate that I did that, because I went up to men who had children and I asked them, what did you say to your kids? What did you say to the kids that you beat up and you abused and you got loaded with? What did you say to them? And armed with that, I took that journey with a whole different attitude than if I'd have gone on my own without talking to people. Because I really went in there without expecting anything in return. You know? And my oldest son, who's like, he just recently turned 25, and he's living on the street. He's a real bad drunk. He's just gotten out of prison. He hates me with a passion. He dreams of killing me slowly with a knife. When I went up there this 6 years ago, 5, 6 years ago, he looked at me like, I've got this coming. He knew what I was doing, you know. I think he was a little bit surprised that I was doing it, but his attitude was, you bet you better apologize to me. And there was none of this, oh, it's okay, Dad, don't worry about it. He hates my guts, and he, you know, I mean, that's the way I felt about my father. I made amends to my kids before I made amends to my father. This father of mine was a man that I've hated all my life, very intensely, very profoundly. And I went to him on his 70th birthday, and I took him into a room, and I sat him down, and he looked at me, and he says, you know, you don't have to do this. And I said, you better than anybody know that I do. Man, this is your club, man. This is your rules, you know. And I sat down, and I looked at him, and I said, you're my father, and I love you. And I don't want to hate you anymore. I'm sorry for the way I treated you. I'm sorry I wasn't the son that you wanted me to be. You know, I'm sorry, I love you. I don't want to hate you anymore. And the first time that I can ever remember, he put his arm around me and hugged me. He's just not that kind of a person. But we do that today. And we can put up with each other for about an hour, which is really good, I think, you know. And we kind of look at each other when it's at about an hour, we kind of, yeah, well, I'll see you later, you know. You know? But we don't stand up and say, fuck you in each other's face anymore. You know, we don't do that anymore. We're okay. You know, in that sense, we're friends. We're all right. I've made my peace with my father. You know, and I've made my peace with my sons. It's up to them now to put me to rest. You know, they're going to have to come to me someday, hopefully, if they ever get sober. Both of them are bad drunks, and make their peace with their father. You know, to get rid of the resentments that ran my life for so many years. The 10th and 11th and 12th step, some people call them the maintenance steps. The 11th step to me is the great journey of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, it's trying to get closer to whatever it is that saved our lives. I have no concept of God. You heard me earlier say that I don't know that I believe in God. Well, I don't think that's totally true, but I have no concept in my mind's eye. I don't see anything when I pray. I don't know. If I sit around and think about it, I will reject the concept. Because to me, this whole thing is lame. This whole thing is just lame as hell. Living a spiritual life, when you're on the outside looking at Alcoholics Anonymous, when you're sitting around the fringe of the room and you're not really in, it's lame and it's not hip. But when you're in it and you're doing it and you're connected with what's going on, the music changes. The whole thing changes. This is my life today. This is what I do. You are who I am. This is it. I've come home, finally, after all these years. There's peace in my life. There's peace in my house. I mean, it's not perfect, but there's peace. I've never had peace. The first time peace happened to me, I almost fell asleep. I was looking for a head rush, you know? That's what I'm used to. I'm not used to peace. The lack of turmoil is stunning in my life, you know? And I'm starting to get used to it. The 12th step to me is why I'm here. My sponsor said to me, Bill, the time's going to come where you're going to have to ask yourself why you were saved. And I believe I know. There are times in my life when I'm doing this work to where I'm exactly in the right spot. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I'm right on time, and I'm doing exactly why I was sent here. And I feel that feeling. There's a connection. I've always been a coward all my life. And one night on Memorial Day weekend, I got a 12-step call, and I was in this Clint Eastwood movie scene out in Gardena. And I was standing looking down a hallway, and they were all white doors with just hasps on the door with a padlock on them. There was screaming going on. There was some woman screaming hysterically. There was nobody at the window when you walk in this place. So I was standing there, and this other guy that went with me was standing behind me, and he didn't want to come in. And I was standing looking down that hall, and I had to go down the hall to find this guy that had called. And I knew in my heart that I couldn't just turn and leave, and I was scared to death. There were tears in my eyes, my knees were shaking, and I closed my eyes and I said, please, God, help me. Please help me. And the fear was just jerked out of my chest. And I was there when that happened. You can't tell me there's not something happening in my life, because the fear went away. And I remember standing there going, sweet Jesus, you know? And I just walked down the hall, and it was okay. And to this day, I believe that I'm on a mission from God, and I'm protected. And that when you're going to the meeting or to the 12-step call, you won't get tickets or anything, and you find a parking space when you get there. And there was a drunk who had been hanging around there for days, for weeks actually. He had long hair and a beard, and he was a mess. He was sleeping in the bushes in the back. And, and he was drunk, and we had just gotten out of the meeting, and my sponsor went up to him and asked him, he said, if we find you a bed, will you go? And the guy said, well, yeah, sure, I guess so. So my sponsor went to make a phone call, and there was another guy standing there, and the drunk had wandered off. And I was standing there talking to this guy, and I said, what are we wasting our time on this guy for, man? He's just some way. He's just bumming money off of people. What the hell are we wasting our time? And this guy turned on me, and he said, who the fuck are you? I went, whoa, you know, I'm here to make friends, you know. And he said, that's what I looked like when I got here. Where do you think you are? What do you think this is? Where do you think you are? This is Alcoholics Anonymous. If he can't come here, where the hell can he go? This is what we're here for, is to help these people. So the sponsor comes back, and I was duly chastised, and I was being very spiritual and talking to the man, you know. Because I don't mind working with drunks as long as they're clean and nice and white and stuff, you know. It's okay. So my sponsor looks at me, and he says, we got this guy a bed. Go get your car. So I went and got my car, and I come driving up, and they opened up the back door and threw his bedroll in, opened up the front door and threw him, and nobody else got in the car. Which still pisses me off to this day. And he handed me some little cheese and crackers, and he says, here, if the guy wants to stop for something to eat, give him this. Don't stop for nothing. Take him to the way back in. So I drove him there. On the way there, this guy looks at me, and he says, and I'm scared. I figure the guy's going to kill me and eat me, you know. And the guy looks at me, and he says, you know, what happened to me, man? I was married. I had a couple of kids and stuff. What happened? I don't know what happened. And he was crying. It never crossed my mind that maybe he was afraid, you know. And I looked at him, and he wasn't that much older than me, if he even was older than me at all. By the time I got to the way back in, I was holding his hand. This guy was my own personal alcoholic, you know. We had bonded, you know. And I took him in there, got him signed in, told the guy to take care of my buddy. I've never seen him again. But on the way home, I said a prayer. And it wasn't a prayer of, thank God that's not me. It was a prayer, thank you, God, for helping me to find myself. All these years I've been on this journey, and I figured I could figure it out in my head. And it's not in my head, it's in my heart. And you people have given me back my heart. Thank you.
Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.